let's take a look at how to use the mobile VR interaction pack. Of course, at the top, there's the intro and the video tutorials. You can click here to watch a video, which you're probably doing right now. And so let's just jump right to this part. How to use it on the initial setup. Let's look at importing the pack. First of all of our packs have been moved into a folder called In Your Face. And the reason why is if you purchase multiple assets of ours from the asset store, they're all going to be in one folder instead of having, maybe 6 folders. In some of the projects that I do, I end up with, 6 different folders from my assets. So this moves them all into one folder. And then in there we have a folder that's shared with all of our assets, and that's called demo assets. So the VR interaction pack uses the demo assets, and a lot of my other assets as well use the demo assets folder. So if you don't want to use the demo, you don't need the demo assets, and you don't need the demo scene. Now the demo scene is unique to each asset, but the assets themselves are going to be shared between all of our packs. Because I want to use the demo, I'm just going to import everything. And to see how that works using multiple assets, and later in the video we're going to be looking at using the Google VR, using this pack with the Google VR and the Gear VR camera tool. So now that I've imported it, here it is. First thing I'm going to do before we get into the demo is I'm going to do a basic setup on a completely new scene here. So let's go ahead and go to the initial setup section, and it tells us to make a game object with a that's called player. So we'll make player, and that's at 0, 0, 0. The main camera needs to be a child of that, and that child needs to be at 0, 0, 0, both for position and rotation. And then if you want to move the camera up off the ground, you could put it to move the player's position. I'm going to move it up to 2, so it's 2 meters off the ground. The next thing we got to do is add a physics raycaster component to the main camera. And if you want to move the camera while you're holding Alt and tilt it while you're holding Control, you need to add the script editor mouse look. So let's do those 2 things right now. We need a raycaster, so I'm going to add the physics raycaster, and then I also want to add that editor mouse look. So editor mouse look is added. That script is here in the demo assets under the scripts folder. You'll see most of the demo scripts begin with the word demo, so you know it's a demo script. It's not actually part of the pack. All the scripts that are a part of the pack start with the 3-letter prefix in VR. And the reason it says in VR is because it's for in your face VR script. The difference there is, for example, on the gaze input module, you'll notice the naming convention for the Google VR scripts that these originated from is GVR. So basically the G has been replaced with an in for in your face, and for example, the gaze input module has been heavily modified to handle distance and UI elements and whatnot. So back to the script editor mouse look. The reason why it has the editor word at the beginning is because it only works inside of the editor, and so it's the editor's mouse look, because we can't turn our head in VR. So you'll see it says if Unity editor at the very beginning, and it ends it at the very end. So when you build this script will do absolutely nothing, because it's only being used for while you're in the editor. But if you do add that camera to that, if you do add the script to the main camera, then you're going to notice that if you hold down the Alt button, you can rotate the head around, and then if you hold down Control, you can tilt. And that is a normal behavior with the Google VR SDK, but when you're using this interaction pack, you may not have the Google VR SDK, and so that's why the editor mouse look is included. For example, with a Gear VR build, you don't necessarily need to have the Google VR SDK in here at all. So now that we've added the physics raycaster, the editor mouse look, let's go back to the documentation, see what step 3 is. We need to add a UI event system to the scene. So I'm going to say create UI event system, and we're going to need to add the gaze input module. So if you just type gaze, there it is, the NVR gaze input module. Another way to find that would be to just type the NVR prefix, and then you can find all the scripts that are part of this pack that aren't demo scripts. So the one we need to add is the NVR gaze input module, and you need to right click on, or just click on the gear there and say move up so that the gaze input module is above the standalone input module. And now we're going to need to add one of the dot one of the dot prefabs to the camera. So if you go to the prefabs folder, you'll see there's the dot and the ring, and you need to put one of these as the child to the main camera. I'm going to add them both to the main camera, and then I can disable or enable one of them to see what they both look like. So the ring always has the dot, and when you move it to an interactive object, it expands to a ring. And to show that, let's add a cube. I don't want it to be a child of the camera, but let's add the cube, and then it won't be interactive. And this is going to be a lot easier to see if I add a material from the demo assets folder. Let's add a brown material to the box. Now it's not interactive unless it has an event trigger. So you need to add an event trigger or the VR interactive script. But if I just add an event trigger, that makes it interactive. Likewise, if I remove this and I just add a NVR interactive object script, I'll also be able to interact with it. If it's within distance. I think it's too far away. Let's turn this up to 10. There we go. So if it's a VR interactive object, this script actually adds the event trigger. So it has to have an event trigger or a VR interactive object script to interact with it. So now that that's been added and it's within distance, you'll see, so the ring is a dot always, and it expands into a ring. That's the default scripts from the Google VR SDK. Now the modified one here is the dot, and that is designed to be more immersive, where you don't always have a UI element on the screen. So it might make it a little bit harder to aim, but there's nothing on the screen, and when I look at an interactive object, there's a dot now. Okay, let's move down to interacting with objects. We've already done it a little bit, but if you want to have an outline on objects, it can't be batching static. So you'll see what I mean by this is, let me turn on the outline, and I'm going to pick a color for it. And then you'll see the outline works, and I can make it a wider outline so it's easier to see, but it can't be static. It can be everything static except batching. It cannot be batching static because the mesh of this is used to make the outline. So this works because it's not static, but you're going to see if I set this to static and I try that, it works, but it's probably because it's the only mesh in the scene, and you cannot have let me duplicate this and try that again. It shouldn't work. It's still working. No, it did something really funny. You see, when I looked at it, it moved the boxes for no reason, and that's because it's Unity is batching the mesh, and then that unique mesh, each unique mesh is needed for the outline. So it cannot be batching static. It can be light map static, occlude, everything else. It just can't be batching static if you want to use that outline. So you'll see now the box didn't do a weird movement when I looked at it. We've already talked about adding the NVR interactive object script. And then the different vars here, interaction enabled is the are you allowed to interact with the object? And that's, if you turn that off, of course, that just toggles interaction. Of course, the two boxes on the side I can interact with, but not that. And then if we look at we look at the next variable, the interaction distance, we already seen how that works. That's how close or far you have to be from the object in order to interact with it. And then here's click with gaze, which clicks on the object, and this is how long you look at the object before the click happens. And to demonstrate that, we'll have to add a let's add an event trigger, and then we're going to add a pointer down. And for the pointer down, I'll just say for this game object, let's just toggle it off, set active false. So if you click on it, it's going to turn it off. I'll test that real quick by looking at it and clicking, and then we could see how the click with gaze works. So if I say click with gaze and it's set to 3, then I'm going to look at that. It's going to go 1, 2, 3, turn it off. And of course, if that's set to 1, it's going to click on. I put the wrong one. Let's Control Z that. There we go. And let's change the click gaze time to 1. So if we look at it, it's going to turn off after only 1 second. So this allows you to click on objects just with the gaze. And then we got the show outline. Of course, that's going to show the outline. We already seen how the outline width works. And then there's the outline grow speed, which the grow speed is how fast the outline grows. It's easiest to demonstrate this if I make it really, really slow. So let me turn it up to like 20, and then we'll look. That's fast. Let me turn it to 0.14. 0.04, that's going to be very slow. So if I go look at the cube now, that outline is slowly growing into shape. You can see it's growing very slowly, because when you look at a object, the outline doesn't just instantly appear. It slowly grows into place for a nice visual effect. Now, if you didn't want that, I guess you could set the outline grow speed, like we had it to 10 was basically an instant thing. Let me make a really big width on the outline so we could see it, but there's basically an instantly showing. And then if I change this down to 0.1, it's going to slowly grow into position. Let's try just a value of 1 on that. So that's the outline grow speed. The depth offset is how near or far the outline is. And so the outline essentially is normally drawn at the same depth, at a depth of essentially 0, the same depth of the object, but you can move the outline closer or farther away. So by default, this is 0. But depending on your object, you can adjust this to get the outline to look good. And then there's the color. Of course, pick a color for the outline that you want to have, and it shows up like that. Now let's keep going down the list. We covered everything in that. We got the NVR interactive object. You can set it up for all of the pointer events. Now interacting with the UI works essentially the same way. Let's just go ahead and add a UI, and we're going to do a UI. Let's add a button so we get something to click on. And I don't know why I did this in play mode. I guess to teach how to do it a better way, we're going to add a panville. That's going to add a canvas and a panel, and then to the panel I'm going to add a button. And then up to the canvas, we're going to move it to a world space UI. And let's look at what happens here. So this is a huge UI. When we make it world space, I want to move the position to 0, 0, 0, and I want the width to be 100 by 100. And that's still way too big, because if I go look at my cube down here, it's, obviously the UI is too big, so we're going to go to the canvas and we're going to scale the canvas down to 0.01, 0.01, 0.01. and now we actually have something that's more of a decent size for the player. The button's too big, so I'll go ahead and make the width 200. And my example in the demo, which kind of shows this as a TV screen or something like that. This is something that you would actually physically probably place into your world, and it makes sense that it's there and the user would interact with it. So we have the UI. I'm going to hit play, and you'll see I can't interact with anything here. So all you got to do is on objects that you want to interact with, like the button, I need to add a NVR interactive UI script. Now there's distance here, which lets me set how close or far from the button I need to be, and then there's also the click with gaze option, which lets you click on that UI element via gaze. And for now, that's the only two options that are there. So I've added the NVR interactive UI script, and I can interact with the UI. Let's look at what's going on, and the reason why is we really need to pay attention to the depth of items on the UI and whether or not they have the raycast target option selected. So here it says raycast target on the text, and that is because it doesn't have the NVR interactive UI script on it. So now if I add that script, it's gonna work. But I really don't, and I can click on the button, but another option would be to remove that and turn off raycast target on the text, because really if we just ignore this on the raycast, then it's going to hit the button, and that's probably, I don't know, it's probably a little bit better for performance because there's less objects that the raycast has to consider. So there's two ways to go about building your UI, and that is adding NVR interactive UI script to basically everything, or really manage your raycast target option here so that only UI elements that you want to actually interact with have the raycast target selected. So here, of course, the button is interactive, and so the image is a raycast target, and on the text we're just going to turn off raycast target, and that's going to work by normal. Now you'll look in the documentation, we're going to see that instead of using the going up to the button here and using the on click, I suggest to add an event trigger, and on the event trigger use the pointer down for your click events. So if I wanted to make this cube disappear, and I'm in play mode again, so let's get out of there and go back to the text, turn off raycast target, and then on the button we're going to add the event trigger, and then we're going to add the event type for pointer down instead of pointer click, because a click is a down and an up. And so pointer down, we want to, let's go ahead and turn off this game object cube number 1. So back to the button, we're going to say cube number 1, and we'll say game object set active false. And that way, when the pointer goes down on the button, that is a better way to do a click, because on a cardboard, for example, this doesn't always register the down up, which makes a click. So you won't always get a click when you're pushing this button, but you will always get a click if you just use pointer down, for example, on a cardboard headset. So that is how you set up the UI, and then we've already talked about changing and adding the dot. Now, if you're going to use this with the Google VR SDK, there's nothing special at all. It's fully compatible. You just need to use the scripts. For example, you would use the NVR gaze input module, and these prefabs that you could use this event system, these dots, instead of the scripts that come in the Google VR SDK. And we're actually going to look at that, because with the Google VR and the Gear VR camera asset, you have to have the Google VR SDK in the project. So before we move on to that, let's just open up the demo scene really quick. And the demo scene pretty much is going to cover everything that that we just covered, and shows you an example of how to do it with a lot more detail. So of course these UIs are a lot more detailed. There's a 3D radial button. You can look at this script and see how it works. Same thing with the gaze slider. You can look at the gaze slider script and see how that works, and see how to interact with objects, see how to interact with objects, with children. Look at some 3D geometry that just are not going to work with this outline shader. The outline shader needs the object to have a little bit of depth and to be an actual, 3D object instead of a completely flat plane like this object is. So that's an example of how to properly and use the outline shader, and when you might have problems. So you see, when I look at this, I get a green outline, but when I look at this one, I don't see an outline, and the reason why is it's on the back of it. So the outline shader isn't perfect. It's on some objects it's not going to work correctly. So on this completely flat planed object, you'll see we had to add some depth to it in order to get the outline to show up properly. And then over here there's an example of how to play an animation, and over here an example of how to interact with physics objects and move a rigid body. So the next part of the tutorial is going to be integrating the Google VR and the Gear VR camera asset. That is the one from the asset store, our pack here. Let me just import it really quick. It's called the Google VR Gear VR camera setup. Now you'll see what we were talking about at the beginning of the video, that this camera asset also has the demo assets folder, and it's adding a couple scripts into the scripts folder. So again, this demo assets is shared between all demos, and it's also going to import the Google VR and the Gear VR folder. So now we'll have the in-your-face folder with the demo assets and then the two packs. Now again, if you didn't want to use the demo from the Google VR Gear VR camera, you would deselect the two demo folders that have the scenes that are specific to that project. But I want to bring the demo in. I want to bring in the demo assets. So we're going to import the entire pack. And the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to tell us to import the Google VR SDK. So I'm going to go ahead there. You can use 1.2. There's actually demos for both 1.20 and Google VR 1.03. I guess I'll import Google VR 1.20 since it's the newest. So here's the Unity package, and it's going to import that. I'm going to deselect the plugins that I'm not using. So under the plugins folder, I don't need the iOS or the 32-bit. And the next thing, it says warning: build target is not Android, and I do need to set that, because after it gets done setting the build target, the Google VR SDK is going to tell me I need to update the, here it is, you need to import the additional package because I'm using a non-native version of the Google of Unity. So I've imported that, and what that did was it imported this GVR backwards compatibility package. And what I mean by that is this version of Unity 5. I'm on 5.41, or for example 5.51 does not support the Google Cardboard SDK natively. So if I say virtual reality supported, there's no option here for Google. All right, we have set the build target to Android, so let's clear out these errors in the console. And now we're ready to switch between Gear VR. If I hit Gear VR, it said GVR viewer could not be found. And you'll see that I need to import the Google VR SDK. I need to add GVR viewer main to the scene. So we need to go to the Google VR. We need to go to the prefabs. And then this GVR viewer main prefab needs to be added to the scene. We need to make sure that the GVR head script is added to the main camera. Okay, yeah, it's because if I hit build for Gear VR, it's going to say GVR head cannot be found. So we need to go to the main camera and we need to add the GVR head script. So now that the GVR head script is added, let's clear the console out. VR build settings, build Gear VR, and we'll hit play. We get a full screen camera. You'll see that we can interact with stuff. And if we say VR build settings, build Google VR, we're going to get the split screen and we can interact with stuff. Now, this works right out of the box to where the input system just works on the Gear VR and it just works on the Google Cardboard. So you don't have to worry about any problems with the gaze input not working. And it also works for both targets in the editor. So when I hit Build Gear VR, I get a full screen camera, and I can also rotate and tilt my head with the Control and Alt buttons. So at any time, I could say build and run, and it's going to build for that target. That's how you do the integration with the Google VR Gear VR camera asset. And that brings us to the end of the documentation, which we're at the end of the video. Thank goodness, because congratulations for finishing the tutorial. It's always a good feeling to get that stupid tutorial done. Thanks for watching, you guys. Make something cool with the interaction pack, and stay tuned for updates, because this is right now, as of this video, this is version 0.2. So there's going to be more updates coming soon.